Thanks for joining me on a complicated topic. This video is going to cover dealership gouging and markups, the car market in general, supply and demand, supply shortages, and why I think in many ways if it continues this way, the car industry is going to destroy itself. And it's going to destroy itself for future generations. So let's get right into it. This began for me as I've listened to consumers and people I talk to, including people in the industry, talk over and over again about the same topics. Like, I can't get cars. Why are cars so expensive? You know, when I do find a car, I'm fighting with other people, or dealerships are marking things up. And why are cars so complicated now? And you know, you get into the repair costs and all the things that go into that as well. So we're in this shift, right? We're in this shift between the internal combustion car where you put gasoline in it to a shift to hybrids or mild hybrid setups where it's partial gasoline, partial electric, and then the shift to electric vehicles, or, you know, some companies want to go hydrogen. And it's this sticky place because you have the regulations from government to say you have to meet X amount of numbers by this period of time. And we saw the accelerated development or accelerated engineering that these manufacturers had to do in terms of engine design, you know, to meet those fuel economy standards, oftentimes cheating them. You had emission standards, also cheating those as well, because it's very hard to meet all these numbers while still trying to evolve and accelerate the engineering to make this thing work. And what you're doing is, by adding all of this complication to a lot of these modern cars, it's driven up costs that get passed on to consumers. It's also driven up the, I want to say, complication to repair them and have a supply chain to support these cars long term. You know, if you looked at a 2001 Camry, you know, you can go anywhere right now and have that car fixed in like 2 days. You can get parts for it, and you're going to be in and out of a service shop in like with next to no cost, unless it's something catastrophic. You can keep that car running. It's easy to work on, it's easy to service. Fast forward to a car today, like a Camry today, if you have a plug-in hybrid, you have a battery pack, you have internal combustion engine, you have electric motors, you have dual injection, you have more fuel injectors, you have more electronics, you have more control modules, you have all these things that are way more expensive to fix and service and more difficult to troubleshoot. Now, certain brands have a better supply chain planned out for like 10 years from now. But in 20 years from now or 15 years from now, it's going to be much harder to service and repair these parts as they become more scarce. The refurb market is more sketchy, and we see that today. You go to a major auto parts store, in terms of electronics, you can get 3 parts. They're all bad just out of the box. And the thing is it's not like cars are $20,000 anymore. When prices have gone up in the United States to like $40,000, $45,000 for traditional family cars, and probably going to go higher than that as they get even more complicated with batteries, you know, it's not like the stakes are higher to buy that car and try to keep it long term, because also you have to keep it longer because now you have almost a small mortgage on a vehicle to buy it. And this is where you're starting to create pressure and stress on the car economy, where people are stuck in their cars because they're not appreciating assets. We all know that. You go and drive a commodity car out of the dealership, you take a Ford Escape and you pile 100,000 miles on it in 3 or 4 years, that car is worthless. Let's be honest. You're not going to get your money back if you're spending $38,000 on it. You might be lucky to get a dealership to give you like 24. So you're blowing a lot of money, and if you have to get out of a car quickly because you lost your job, there's no way you're getting out of that in the first 3 years, and you might have like a 6-year loan on that car. So prices have gone up, complication has gone up, and now you have a supply chain issue where dealerships can't get cars. So the big question is, well, why is the dealership marking up everything? So in the United States, of course, regulatory reasons, it's a huge story that you could go back generations and see that manufacturers do not sell directly to the public. You have these franchise, private-owned dealerships that sell cars to people. They're kind of that intermediary. So you have these big storefronts, and let's just take any dealership, a Toyota, Mazda dealership, a Ford dealership. There are requirements to have certain levels of stores to not only get allocation, to have certain product. You have to have a storefront that looks a certain way. You have to have a showroom that looks a certain way, a certain color maybe, certain lighting. The architecture of the building has to meet what the manufacturer says. And these are insanely expensive upgrades to these dealerships. So now you spent all this money. You might even have huge business loans to keep these dealerships up to date. You have coffee bars. You have all the BS that customers now expect to come into a dealership, these lounges. And you have a huge headcount. You have support staff. You have the people that are meeting you at the front desk. You have customer service. You have online salespeople. You have salespeople. You have finance people. You have, fill in the gaps. And then you have the service side. The electricity, to keep that building up to date, plumbing, HVAC, heating costs are up. You still got to heat these huge buildings. So we're talking about a massive investment, massive money these companies, these dealerships are bleeding to support just selling you a car, to get you in there to sell a car. What happens if they don't have cars to sell? Well, the first thing is that they default on loans, or they lay off people, or they cut costs. You start to get desperate, and the dealership down the road starts getting desperate. And you might be trying to chum up with your local regional rep who's in charge of allocations for getting your dealership cars. You might be doing different things creatively to make money. The bottom line is, if you can't sell cars, you're not making money, and you can't afford to have the people that you have there. So what do? You start marking up your cars. That's just it. And if you can take an enthusiast car or a specialty car that's more limited production and mark those up even further, that's like if you get somebody to bite on a Honda Civic that should be $40,000 and you're selling it for $70,000, that margin just paid for like 4 car sales. And even if it means sitting on it for a couple months, that's what they're going to do. And in some ways, you feel sympathetic to that because, they're running a business too. But in the same token, the other side is the manufacturers have no control over some of this. And they don't have control because they're beholden to their franchisees, their dealerships that are spending all this money to sell their cars. They're not going to pressure the dealerships who are already strained, that don't have the money and they can't get inventory from you. They're not going to go and penalize these dealerships or threaten them with pulling allocations on some of these mainstream cars. It's just not going to happen. When you create that environment, the consumers are going to lose, period. They're going to lose. And this is just the way it is in this country. And you might say, well, Canada, you can't sell cars for over MSRP there. You're going to get the car for what the MSRP is. Well, that's not true either, because dealerships are tacking on like bows on top, or PPF, paint protection film, ceramic coating for $10,000, $20,000. So they can get extra money for selling that car, and you can't take that stuff off. That literally the car has to be bought with that. So what you're doing is you're creating this culture of already having cars that are way too expensive that people can't afford, longer loans that are like mortgages, cars that are depreciating assets, and now you're pricing out the younger generation that you desperately need to indoctrinate into the car world to get them to be future customers. You're pricing them out. So now you're left with the 30, 40, 50, 60-year-old plus that have money or may have money or might even be smart enough not to buy. You're pricing your future customer out, and you're damaging your brand. And this is what I've told to many dealerships. And I went through this when I was younger. I went into dealerships where they're like, oh, you're not good enough for this car, or this is too much car for you, the typical dealer tactics, or, this car is pretty rare, we're going to mark it up a couple thousand, right? And those dealerships experiences that I had like that, I've never gone back. And the cars that I have gone back to were always in the used market, so I never had to deal with that brand again. But my point is, if, really, this system needs to be overhauled. It needs to be fixed, because if you don't, you're going to destroy the car industry. And, aside from all of that, you're seeing what's happening in the car industry now, and you may not see it today, but you're going to start to see it in 10 years. The same thing that happened in the phone market. You contracted down the mobile phone OS to essentially 2 mobile phone OSs, and you have all these brands that perished in the meantime, because once you had kind of everything set in place, people have this expectation of one experience. And that's what the car manufacturers are trying to do with the cars. Namely, once you get into the real EV market, where cars are giant microwaves on wheels, where literally people want to get in and do nothing. The requirements are, one, it has the tech that works with your phone. It's quiet. It's quiet. It's quiet. And who has the biggest battery pack to go the farthest without charging? Much like your phone. I want to go 2 days without charging. That's a big selling feature. I want my phone to work. I want my car to work. But once you get beyond that and it's quiet and it has all the tech people want, there's not going to be a lot to differentiate them anymore, because you've created a market for appliances. there's two more things I'm going to talk about. One is the enthusiast products. And I've had this conversation with many brands, like what's going on with those? You know, manual transmissions, cars that are engaging to drive, cars that make you feel something emotionally for that small subset of people that actually like driving in this age. And what it really seems to be turning into is even the affordable cars that were designed for those people are now going up in price. And because they're made in smaller quantities, the dealerships are just marking them up to insane levels. You know, like if you would have told me, and I say this a lot, like back in the day, you know, if you told me a Civic Si for like, that used to be like $19,000 or even $24,000 would be going for pushing 35, I would just be like, how is this possible? Or a Corolla, right? I mean, Corolla, you associate with $20,000 car. Can't even get them. And if dealerships have them, they're getting marked up to like $40,000+ or even more. Or people with a lot of money are buying allocations from dealerships to resell them for profit. I mean, it's like a toxic system. For people that are really passionate about something, you're destroying that passion for people. And eventually, you know, you're going to get people that are going to walk away. We're going to get smart. We're going to buy old cars and just sit on them and say goodbye forever. And, you know, there's a stretch to where, you know, manufacturers are going to have those one-off cars for people that love to drive, but they're not going to spend a lot of money in development unless they're going to get margin back. So, you know, prices are going to continue to keep going up to have these small batches. I mean, I just don't see it. I mean, honestly, I don't see it becoming any better. Do you want to set aside production capacity for some like small one-off car? Every car manufacturer we talk to, like, oh, we did this one-off car. It was really hard to get it down the same line as other cars to make it viable financially. And they're sure as shit not going to set up a dedicated manufacturing line for one car if they can't split it off to like 5 different SUVs. They're not going to do that because then the car is going to be way, way more expensive than people can afford. So this enthusiast market that we're in is a scary place. And there's not a lot of cars that are exciting to drive, and the ones that are starting to get more and more expensive. So that's another factor. I know a lot of people talk about that, and I know it's a small subset, but it was worth mentioning. The last thing I'm going to talk about is the money. Financing. Financing is huge, right? That's the way our car economy works. And, you know, when you start having cars that are average transaction price well above $40,000, and people are losing money on it. So if you have a huge economy built around $700-800 a month car payments, and when somebody needs to go trade that car in and they're upside down, banks, they're either going to the cars are going to get repoed, or they're going to be rolling it into future loans. And now that interest rates are up to combat inflation, it's never been more expensive to buy a car. And if you're stuck in a car that you bought for more money and you have an industry that collapses, you're going to have banks taking on a massive amount of loss, and you're going to have people that are stuck in cars that are worth nowhere near what they paid for it. And I think the scary part of that is once you have financing that contracts, which you kind of saw during the pandemic, certain banks were only loaning out X amount of dollars for cars. And in some cases, you saw major banks like limiting loans to like 50 grand. When cars are like 40, 50 grand already, that puts a huge strain on the new car market. So, you know, like there's all these huge pieces of the puzzle that are all aligned to create this huge collapse on this industry. And, you know, what you do now, like from a brand perspective, you need to be thinking about how you fix this. How do you make your cars cheaper and less complicated? How do you work with the government to say, look, we can't meet these targets. You're going to destroy the business long term. You're going to destroy like people buying cars long term. How do you fix people's obsession with wanting everything for nothing and expecting all this tech and all this shit that costs money? How do you fix this stuff? And the big thing is, how do you keep the next generation of car buyers? How do you get 16 to 25-year-olds that are broke from school in this country, that can't afford to go to school or have massive loans? How do you get them even remotely excited to say, hey, do you want to take on some huge debt for a car that's not worth anything? And that's all I'm going to say. I'd be curious to see everybody's opinion on this because it is a very complicated topic. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next video.